Dr. Fauci, as you are aware, it is a crime to lie to Congress. Section 1001 of the U.S. Criminal Code creates a felony and a 5-year penalty for lying to Congress. On your last trip to our committee on May 11th, you stated that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And yet, gain-of-function research was done entirely in the Wuhan Institute by Dr. Shi and was funded by the NIH. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the Wuhan virology paper entitled Discovery of a Rich Gene Pool of Bat SARS-Related Coronaviruses. Please deliver a copy of the journal article to Dr. Fauci. In this paper, Dr. Shi credits the NIH and lists the actual number of the grant that she was given by the NIH. In this paper, she took 2 bat coronavirus genes, spike genes, and combined them with a SARS-related backbone to create new viruses that are not found in nature. These lab-created viruses were then shown to replicate in humans. These experiments combined genetic information from different coronaviruses that infect animals but not humans to create novel artificial viruses able to infect human cells. Viruses that in nature only infect animals were manipulated in the Wuhan lab to gain the function of infecting humans. This research fits the definition of the research that the NIH said was subject to the pause in 2014 to 2017, a pause in funding on gain of function. But the NIH failed to recognize this, defines it away, and it never came under any scrutiny. Dr. Richard E. Bright, a molecular biologist from Rutgers, described this research in Wuhan as the Wuhan lab used NIH funding to construct novel chimeric SARS-related coronaviruses able to infect human cells and laboratory animals. This is high-risk research that creates new potential pandemic pathogens that exist only in the lab, not in nature. This research matches, these are Dr. E. Bright's words, this research matches, indeed epitomizes, the definition of gain-of-function research done entirely in Wuhan, for which there was supposed to be a federal pause. Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Your microphone.
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans,
right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get
NIH,
one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among animals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's let Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2, that's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well,
we don't
wait
know
a minute.
If it did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, It is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is alleging that
molecularly.
those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That
you
is
can't
not.
Get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible
No one's
to
saying
result
they are. No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were
They're not.
animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And
Won't
you
admit the truth.
and you
Senator
implying
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond. Dr.
and you are implying that what we did.
$28 trillion in debt. Whose fault is it? Republicans, Democrats? The answer is yes. Yes on both fronts. Both parties are responsible for the debt. Now, one side is honest about it. One side will tell you they don't give a fig about the debt. The debt be damned. We're for new monetary theory. Spend as much as you've got, borrow as much as you can, and somehow we're going to combat the influence of China by borrowing more money from China. Doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, but that's where we are. So we have before us a bill that will simply add to the debt. We will go further in debt. You might make the argument that we're actually less strong as a nation the more in debt we are. Where's the opposition? Now, there's no opposition on one side of the aisle, and on the other side, there's feigned opposition. Republicans will feign opposition to the debt, and they will say, well, yes, we care about the debt, and the other side spends too much and borrows too much. And you hear Republicans throughout the land campaigning against the debt, only to come to Washington and vote for most of the debt. So what we end up with is a $28 trillion debt. We actually borrow more in a month than we used to borrow in a year. In March of this year, we borrowed $660 billion in 1 month. The proposals for spending are alarming. We have spent and borrowed more in the last 2 years than we did during World War II. There are going to be repercussions of so much borrowing in such a short period of time. We are seeing a misallocation of capital throughout the economy. We are seeing a grossly inflated stock market. We are starting to see inflation throughout the supply chain, throughout the economy. There are going to be repercussions. The question we have to ask ourselves are we willing to look at the example of countries like Venezuela or Zimbabwe that completely destroyed their currency? People say that couldn't happen in America. It largely hasn't happened because we've been the reserve currency of the world. We've been fortunate. People describe it as having the cleanest shirt in a closet full of dirty shirts. The dollar is weakened by such extravagant spending, and yet people still cling to the dollar because the other currencies are weaker. But this bill simply adds more to the debt. And we say we're going to combat China through this bill, but we're going to combat China by increasing a department of government, the National Science Foundation, that is actually probably one of the most wasteful agencies in government. William Proxmire was a conservative Democrat from Wisconsin back in the 60s and 70s. He started an award called the Golden Fleece Award. One of the first awards he gave
Order in the chamber, please.
One of the first awards that William Proxmire gave, the Golden Fleece Award, was an award for a study about what makes people fall in love. You'd think with the lampooning through the years, the ridiculous lizards on treadmills of Panamanian frogs, that after a while people would say, instead of giving this agency that is so full of waste and ridiculous studies, maybe instead of giving them more money, we should give them less money. So perhaps if we wanted them to reform, we would say to the National Science Foundation, instead of increasing your budget 68%, why don't we reduce their budget 10% and say behave better? Why don't we reform how they pick their committees? So, for example, if you want to study...
You need order in the chamber.
If you want to study cocaine and you want to study Japanese quail using cocaine and you want to know if they're more sexually promiscuous, do you know how you get approval for your funding? You call up your other buddies that study cocaine in animals, and you say, hey, I've got this great new study. Would you guys like to join in it and be my peer review committee? So it's actually the ridiculous studies that we discover, they're being voted on by people who are selected by the people doing the studies. So what they do is they select other people with ridiculous studies, and they say, we'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. So how do we get, $500,000 spent studying Panamanian frogs? They want to know whether or not the mating call of the country frogs in Panama is different than the mating calls of the city frogs. Well, coming from a rural state, I can tell you the mating calls of the country folk is always different than the city folk. We could have polled the audience. Are quail more sexually promiscuous on cocaine? I think we could have polled the audience. So the thing is, there could be some reforms. So, for example, as much as I'm opposed to government spending, there are some important diseases, let's say Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, heart disease. Why wouldn't we make the committees for the National Science Foundation, why wouldn't we make the committees have someone on there from one of the big 5 diseases? Why wouldn't we put a taxpayer advocate on there? Why wouldn't we have some sort of inspector general process so this doesn't